I want to know is how it applies. What's that got to do with my life in this time and in this place? And I need to know as best I can what lies behind, what's the historical context out of which this text arises. This is probably one of the most obscure texts that I've come up against, and I've come up against it before. Nobody seems to know what underpins this, what this snakes deal is all about. And I said to the folks at 8:30 when I'm listening to it then, I suddenly thought about snakes and how the tongue comes out, and thought of people talking and the tongues. Where is the focus of the people in that reading? Do you know? Did you notice? That's not a rhetorical question. Anybody know? Notice? What do they say? Where's their focus? I hate this food. We're starving to death. There's no food. Yeah, ever heard that before? Then they add to that, and the food we got, it's inedible. That's the matter. That's the matter. They are so focused on their circumstances, they can't get beyond it. And one rabbi, the only place I saw that started to make some sense, I mean, they're focused on themselves. And this is a desert situation. I'll come to that in just a second. Moses is told to make a snake and hold it up. The rabbi says what happens is instead of looking at themselves and looking down and being down in the mouth, they have to look up. Look up. Beyond and outside of themselves to something greater, something more. Not focusing necessarily on the bronze snake, because they knew better. But it's interesting that in time, they stayed focused on the bronze snake, and so the king Hezekiah has to go and wipe out all the worship centers of the snakes. It's a desert situation. Let me tell you something about the desert. The desert is an absolutely essential, critical piece of Christian spirituality and Judeo-spirituality. It's a piece that is almost lost, I think. The desert is an inhospitable, challenging, dangerous place. You don't enter it lightly. Most folks don't want to enter it at all. But there are times in our lives when there's a sense in which we really don't have a choice, and we find ourselves in a desert. We find ourselves in a wilderness. We're lost in some way or other. You have two choices at that point. You can either embrace it, but be careful, it's like embracing a cactus. It's dangerous. Or you can deny it and run away from it. I'm going to suggest that the wisest thing we can do is embrace the desert. Why? Let me give you just a couple of examples. One, the experience of Israel. Everybody knows the story of Exodus. In the Exodus, Israel is called out of oppression and slavery in Egypt. And they're called to a new land and a new way of life. We all know that that went down to the Sea of Reeds, often referred to as the Red Sea. The Sea of Reeds, a marsh that they managed to get through. Pharaoh's army doesn't. And then we kind of think, I think popularly, that they then entered the Promised Land. No. What they entered was the desert. And they stayed in the desert for a full generation, which means that most of the people who went into that desert didn't come out. It's a dangerous place. But it is in the desert that they have the defining experience of God's presence. It's in the desert that Moses receives the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments. It's in the desert that this community shapes how it will respond to God and how they will respond to each other. The desert shapes who they are before they get into the Promised Land. The desert. Jesus, as soon as he's baptized, and all three of the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all three tell us as soon as Jesus is baptized, the Spirit descends on him, he knows who he is, he knows what he's about, boom, into the desert. dare say, the same kinds of things that we all struggle with. And where Israel failed, Jesus doesn't. But it's in the desert. And the really interesting piece is that when Jesus' public ministry begins in Mark, the oldest gospel, Jesus does some healing, and he gets great popularity. So popular that the people come pouring out, and he cannot get back into town. He has to stay, and this is usually translated, had to stay on the outskirts, in the countryside. And I think we all think of that as a groomed countryside, maybe out in the suburbs, or maybe out in some nice rolling hills. The word is desert. He had to stay in the desert. And the people who wanted to meet Jesus had to go out in the desert to meet him. So while the desert is a dangerous place, a challenging place, a place that will strip you to the bone, where you will meet yourself, a self you will probably not meet in any other time or any other way, in that desert is a graced place and a graced time. Why should it be embraced? Because we can discover things in the desert we will not discover or see any other way. We are now in a desert. You, me, Christians, the Anglican Church, we're in a desert. The things that we were used to and grew up with, they don't have any cachet anymore. We're not the magnet that we used to be. It's not that the good news that we have isn't still rich and valuable, but we can't keep doing the same old, same old. And so people are drifting away outside, and we're shrinking. We are in the wilderness. We are lost. There is a very real sense in which we are all lost. We know what we want to do. We kind of know how we'd like it to be, but we're not there. And so we are wandering. How do you live in the desert? How do you embrace the desert? First of all, you accept it, and then you open yourself to it. You accept that this is valuable. This is a gift. As painful as it is, as difficult as it is to embrace a cactus, this is a gift. It is God's gift. Did God get us here? No, we got ourselves here. And not just us individually. When I say it is God's gift and God draws us, God also, in a sense, drew Jesus to the cross. That was Jesus' darkest desert. As Moses lifted up the serpent, so the Son of Man must be lifted up. I need to tell you a little bit of biblical exegesis that will help explain this. The passive is used often in Greek. It's called a revelatory passive. While it's passive, must be lifted up. It's not active. He's not lifting himself up. He's being lifted up. The focus is really on God. Let me give you the clearest example. In 1 Corinthians, Paul writes about the resurrection. I hand on to you what was of first importance, that Jesus Christ died for our sins and was raised, and was seen by Peter and the 12, and then by James and the rest of the apostles, and then by 5,000, finally by me. Sometimes that's translated as, and Jesus has appeared to. That's not as good a translation, because it puts the focus on what might be seen as a physical appearance. That's not the focus of the text. The focus of the text is to say, God acted here. God revealed to, or God showed Peter, James, the 12, the other. God showed them that Jesus was alive. It's a faith experience, that Jesus is destroyed. Did God crucify Jesus? No, God did not. Did God will that Jesus die? I don't think so. But what the texts tell us is that God was with Jesus every step of the way. And so he entered into that desert in a way that without God he could not have done. So in our desert situations, we need to be able to do this, to walk this walk, to wander in the wilderness with God. Prayer. And when I say prayer, I don't mean necessarily reading prayers or talking a lot. I'm talking about very simple presence to God. I think of the story of Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat. And when his brothers got jealous, they threw him in a pit, were going to kill him, decided not to, sold him into slavery, and was taken off to Egypt. Did God move those brothers to throw him in a pit? No. Did God move them to jealousy? No. Did God move with Joseph to Egypt? Yes. And was God able, in cooperation with Joseph, to turn that to the Israelites' good? Yes. And so with us, as with Jesus, can God take what seems to be a disaster and turn it into something wonderful, something marvelous, a journey of excitement and challenge? Yes. Was God continually present? Yes. Did everybody see it? No. But Joseph did. Joseph was always looking. And if we want this journey in our wildernesses, whether it's individually or corporately, we want to know that God's present, we need to keep looking. We need to keep asking. And we need to keep trusting. Simple. Lead me, Lord. God, I don't know where the places I am, and I don't know where I'm going. But I trust that you will show me. Just keep me listening. Keep me watching. And then listen. Prayer is more about listening after we've made the request than it is about continuing to talk. As we continue our Lenten journey, as we continue walking together in the wilderness, let's do so with a real sense of optimism and hope, looking for and sharing when we discover God present in our midst, God calling us. I have no doubt, and I've seen it here already. I've only been here a couple of weeks. Is God present here? Yes. In you? Yes. Keep the hope, pass on the good news, and trust in God who walks with us in this journey in our wilderness.